Right?
Bob has all the coolest collections of things.
Yes, he does.
I think you need one more monitor, Bob.
I do. I've got two more. Two more.
There you
can't
go.
see.
Yeah, your setup is epic.
Yeah,
Some
I'm
ones
loving
I'm
that.
actually working on.
He's trading stocks all day. What's going on?
I'm watching my 401k go down the tubes.
Oh, it's rough. Okay, well, we are
On
recording.
monitors.
It is 2:01. We've got 33 people in the meeting. So thanks everybody for joining us on these sort of late-breaking training scheduled for this week. We have today, we're doing photo mechanic with Bob, best practices and workflows. We have 2 additional sessions, so we're going to segue into a training session on Premiere Rush after this. It's a separate meeting, so we'll jump out and we'll rejoin for those of us watching the Premiere Rush. And then tomorrow we have a session on, it's for Teradek users. If you don't have Teradek equipment, you're certainly welcome to observe, but it will be specific to the Teradek equipment live streaming. I hope to also get you guys a tutorial on a tool that we've been using in Bergen and in New Jersey, and it was suggested from you guys at USAT. It's called StreamYard, and that's been a really helpful tool for streaming using webcams, kind of a similar view to what you see here. And it's a really kind of seamless, easy tool to get some decent looking live streams out from people in remote locations. But that one's not scheduled yet. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to hand over the screen to Bob. Thanks, everybody.
Hey guys, so this session is really meant to be an intro and a how-to for new users, as well as some tips in dialing of settings and preferences for those who use it now. So we'll try to hit both ends there. We'll do a really quick demo just to give you an idea of how I use it, say, at a football game, just to show the workflow. And then we'll dive into the settings and preferences that'll make everything much smoother in use. And then we'll take a slower look at the workflow in detail. And then finally, if there's time at the end, we'll take a look at PM6 Plus, which is the catalog digital asset management system that's now in beta. I think if you haven't seen it yet, it's really cool. And especially if you're a freelance person or you don't have access to a system like Merlin, it's really important. So PM5 and PM6, what's the difference? Well, PM6 is newer, faster, has a few nicer features, it's rewritten from scratch, but most importantly, it's a 64-bit program. Why is that important? Well, all Mac OSs after Mojave are 64-bit, and they will not run 32-bit programs like PM5. So if your IT or you decide to upgrade to Catalina, you must also upgrade to PM6. And eventually everybody's going to have to do that. So PM5 is fine now if you're on Mojave and lower, but at some point everybody's got to move up. So in a separate email, we've emailed you a PowerPoint of all of the screens and settings that I'm going to show you, as well as 2 preference files, one for PM5, one for PM6, that you can import into your preferences and make them your own, or you can merge them with yours, or you can just look at them. I think they really will be helpful, but please, if you do that, make sure you export your own and save them so that you can go back, because they'll have settings like your FTP settings. You want to make sure you don't lose that. So export and save your own, import mine, play with them, keep them, merge them, but make sure you have your own. So at that point, let's take a look at a demo really quickly of what I do. And let's see if I can figure out how to do this. Hold on. Teams, share, and stop. Okay, hopefully you guys can now see my screen.
We do.
Excellent. So I go to a football game, I come in at halftime, I've got 10 minutes. In that 10 minutes, I'm going to try to get out as many pictures as I can. That's why photo mechanic is so important. So I'm just going to shove a disk in here, and boom, automatically ingest starts, and it's going to pull in all of my pictures just like that. Boom, it's done. That took me like 3 seconds. I'm going to double click on a picture, and I'm going to start going through things here. until I find something that looks reasonable. And that one there, that looks okay. So what am I going to do? I'm going to click on crop. Now again, I'm going through this real fast. I just want you to see in real time how this works. I'll crop the picture. In PM6, I can click right here and see what the crop looks like. I say, yeah, that's pretty good. I click the letter I. I have a caption, which is of course totally wrong, but let's assume that that had the right information in there. And I'm going to use like so. And actually, let's just save a few minutes. I'm not going to bother with the caption and just say OK. And I'm going to hit U for upload. That's going to give me my upload screen and send. And that's it. That picture's gone. And it is now in FTP. So that took, what, 30 seconds to go through the whole process? I can click back out. I can go to another picture, scroll down, go, okay, that picture's all right. I'm going to crop it, and I'm going to hit I for caption. I'll fill in exactly what the caption is supposed to be. I'll say OK, hit U for upload, and send. It's gone. That's how quickly we can get pictures out if everything is set up in advance. So that is my typical workflow when I'm in a hurry. At this point, if I have a little bit more time and I'm not in quite so much of a rush, we can go back to a picture like this. I can hit E for edit. That is going to open Camera Raw in my case. And I can then up the saturation and do what I want, contrast, highlights, whatever I need to do. Save image. I save it in the same folder right here and just add a letter. And what that does is I'll say done. I go back to Photo Mechanic, and there the picture is ready for sending. So those are my two quick workflows, one if I need Photoshop and one if I don't. Now, let's go in and start messing with preferences and settings, because this will set up everything for you to make it easy to go do what you're supposed to do. So in Photo Mechanic 5 or 6, go to Preferences, and we'll start with General. And these are going to be very similar for Photo Mechanic 5 and 6. You can follow along if it's open in your desktop, but don't worry about it because the PowerPoint that I've included and sent earlier has frame grabs of every one of these settings. So don't worry about copying them, writing them down. These will all be in the file that you can download there. When I start, typically I'll open an empty contact sheet here. And on Mount of Camera Disk, I want to show the ingest dialog. I want that to pop up as soon as I put a card in. The rest of this we can leave alone. The second, under Contact Sheet, there's one really important setting here. And that's right here under Wraparound to Beginning and End. The reason this is important is you can go through a whole disk 4 times without realizing that you're looking at the same pictures if this setting is checked. And we don't want that. So we want to keep Wraparound unchecked, so when you get to the end, it really is the end, and you don't waste time looking at pictures twice. There's one other setting here, labels, file name plus one label, or file name only. And this is really handy because if you add a secondary piece of information, a variable, like here on label 1, let's look in the browser. You see I have a file name, but I also have a date shown. That's because I have file name plus one label, and I have the variable set to date. You can set this for anything you want. You can set it for date, you can set it for lens choice, you can set it for file size, anything that you find useful looking in the browser, you can have that additional information under here. So this is where you'll set that up. Under Files, essentially we leave this alone. There's not much in here. The default image resolution to use, we set at 200 because for us, Merlin likes 200 pixels per inch, but that's not crucial, so don't worry about too much. Under Launching, this is where we tell Photo Mechanic what to use when you hit the letter E for edit in the browser. And we point it to either Photoshop or Lightroom, depending on what you use. And for a video application, either Final Cut or Premiere Pro, again, depending on what you have set up. So when you try to edit a picture here, and you use the letter E or Command E or Control E on a PC, this is where it'll point to. And also, pretty important, change the default in the maximum number of photos to edit without warning to 1. What this does is, if you pick, say, 15 pictures, if you select 15 pictures in the browser and you tell it to edit, you don't want 15 pictures to open in Photoshop because that will bog everything down. So this will warn you and say, are you sure you want to do that? And if you really do want to edit 15, then you can say yes, go ahead. But if you don't, and it's just you've selected too many by mistake, then setting this to 1 is helpful. And lastly, you do want to make sure that if you're RAW plus JPEG, you want to edit the RAW. That's the whole point. So if you decide to edit a RAW plus JPEG pair, you want it to open in RAW. Okay, moving on. IPTC XMP. Generally, we can leave the defaults alone here. But one thing to note is right here, this snapshot. This snapshot will appear in all different screens and settings in Photo Mechanic, and it's one of the most useful things you can do. So if we look at it, we have choices. We can use the current, which I have, or you can choose a default set for different products. In this case, we mostly use Adobe, so we use Adobe products, but we could pick others if we choose. But this snapshot setting is going to appear in many different places, and we're going to revisit it as we go on. Preview. Most important setting here is the same wraparound. For the same reason that we didn't want it set in the other setting, we don't want it set here. So make sure that wraparound is unchecked. And everything else we can leave pretty much as default or as needed. Now, if you're following along in PM5, by the way, these are going to be a little bit different. So right now I'm going through PM6. PM5's has caching up here earlier, so don't worry about it. We'll get to it. We'll get to it also, but they're just in different order. Caching will generally leave alone, with one huge exception, and that's right here: empty disk cache on click. The reason is that this cache will start to get full as we edit many, many pictures. So when you close out for the day, you want this to empty that cache out so you don't start slowing down after a day or two. The same reason you want the same setting set on the sort cache. These two caches you want to be able to clear when you're done for the day. Now, one note, if you're doing a major event like the Oscars or Super Bowl and you're an editor and you're editing thousands of pictures, you might consider either clicking on Empty Now in these two places somewhere halfway through the event, or just closing Photo Mechanic and reopening it somewhere halfway through so that these caches can clear. Otherwise, you might find just when the shit hits the fan in the end of the game or at the end of the evening, the end of the Tony Awards, whatever it is, that things could start to slow down a little bit as these caches get really, really big. So again, if you're an editor doing thousands of photos, that's something to pay attention to. If you're an individual working alone, covering a football game, that's no issue. Don't pay attention. The render cache is the same as, similar to RAW in PM5. And in PM6, what this means is it's going to render, if you open a RAW photo in Lightroom or in Adobe RAW, it's going to put those changes back onto the thumbnail in Photo Mechanic. To me, that's not such a big deal because I typically am not going to edit a picture in RAW and then come back and expect to see those changes in the original file. I'm usually saving it as a second file, and the changes will be visible there. So I don't bother keeping the raw rendering on. It takes a little bit of memory, but you may find differently. But generally speaking, I think this could be off. Similar for PM5 in the raw, you don't necessarily need to have that on. Color management. I set mine to Adobe RGB. All this means is what color profile is going to be put on a picture if the picture has no profile at all. And most pictures that we import have a profile. All the stuff from the professional cameras, most of the stuff from the phones have a profile attached to it already. But if a picture comes in and it has no profile, it will default to Adobe RGB, which is a profile that I like to use that has the widest gamut and is going to have the most colors and the most information in it. So set this to Adobe RGB, leave the rest as default, and you're fine. GPS we don't use. Accessibility is important also. The first thing is scaling the font. I put mine at 110% because I'm old and I can't see shit, so making the font a little bigger is helpful. The other two things that are important are right here. This allows you to customize the IPTC info and the stationary pad. And it gets pretty complicated. I won't get into details here, but it allows you to turn on fields or turn off fields, either for information or visibility. And that allows you to have a customized look when you're filling out your captions or filling out your stationary pad. And we'll look at that in a bit, and you'll see how mine are done. But this is where you'll mess with that. And again, same thing with snapshots. If you look on the bottom here, you'll see I have my set, but you can also go back to PM Classic, which is a smaller version from PM5 that doesn't really appear in PM6 unless you use it here. So again, a little complicated, something you can look at in the future, but this is where it'll be. We have two more settings to look at before we start doing some real work, and that's under Edit, Settings, and Set Info Text is the first. And again, all of this is visible in the PowerPoint that I sent. If you set this default set of Set Info Text, you have all sorts of information that will appear in the browser, and I'll show you that in a second. So you can use my set, you can make your own, but all these variables become really useful information when you're editing. And lastly, we can do settings and then do set code replacements. Code replacements is one of the most powerful features in photo mechanics. I won't go into it in great detail, but I'll just show you quickly. If you look at a file that we've downloaded from codereplacements.com, but you can make your own pretty easily. You have your team numbers, and then you have your information of who they are. When you're filling out a caption, if I type in J10, it's going to tell me New York Jets wide receiver Braxton Berrios. And that's a whole lot harder to type than J10. So I'll show you how that works in a bit, but this feature is so useful for sports where people have numbers, and even for other events. If there's a way for you to put somebody's initials in and then have it expand to their full name, anything you can do in advance, this is going to let you save a whole lot of time when you're working. All right, so that's the quick look at settings. Let me pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions here that they want to jump in before we move on? Sean, I can't see the screen, so give me a shout if anybody's yelling on the chat.
We've got some good immediate feedback that we would like you to do all tutorials of everything forever. I think I heard someone chiming in with a question, so go for it.
We can make that happen.
Hey Bob, it's Dave Barretts. Just if you could clarify for people, when you're shooting an event and you've got multiple cards you're ingesting, are you ingesting to one folder for the entire event, or are you doing it by card, and sort of what's your advice on that?
I will show you that in the next step.
We have a question from Scott and Sandy. I'd like to learn more about the code replacement process.
So that's probably best done separately, I think, because that can get pretty geeky. And I'm more than happy to stay on after or make another appointment or do it on Teams or whatever, and we can do it in detail because it gets pretty geeky doing that. So I think everybody else's eyes will glaze over if I try to get into it in detail right now. But just hit me up on email, or I can stay on. Well, we have another session after this, but we can do it tomorrow. Anytime anybody has time, I'm happy to do it.
And it's super, super useful. I mean, you can use it for a lot more than just sports. Like we use those like political conventions, for speakers that, like, you could do, /HC for Hillary Clinton, so it makes any set piece event that you're covering where you know who's going to be speaking or going to be pictured. It's a huge, huge time saver.
Hey, Bob, Steve here.
Yep.
Great stuff. One scenario that people might come in contact with if they haven't used this is maybe they've gotten an assignment from Imagine, or they've gotten an assignment for the DNC or the RNC, and they get an XMP file.
Yep.
So wherever it makes sense, you can talk through that.
Yep, that's the next step. We're going to go through all that in detail here. Okay, let's do that. I'm going to start. Hang on a second. Get through my notes here. And let us, yes, and pause. Okay, so again, the first thing I'm going to do, we're going to go through this more slowly, is the first thing I'm going to do is ingest. So when I put my card in, actually, I'm going to not do this because that's going to miss. Hang on a moment. Okay. Command G is ingest. So let's look at that first screen. And I'm going to pull that card out. Okay. So this is the ingest screen. What I've been doing in the demo here is I've been doing auto ingest. That's this setting right here. So when I put the card in, it immediately started ingesting. That's fine if you're at a football game and you're doing 5 or 6 different cards. But if you need to change any setting along the way, then that auto ingest will pop up too quickly. So generally, I don't keep it on unless I'm doing multiple cards in a multiple event and I'm ready to roll and I'm not going to be changing anything. But typically, this auto ingest will be off. So when I put a card in, the first thing that's going to come up is right here, the ingest. You have a choice, but you can ingest disks or folders. But generally, most of the time, it's going to be from a disk. I'm going to highlight it. It will be highlighted if you put a disk in by itself. Right now, I needed to highlight it. And there is an option for incremental ingest where you could take the same card and ingest it multiple times and only look at the new ones. I never do that because I have plenty of cards, and I think that just messes with my brain. And so I don't like to do that. So I usually keep this off. These two settings probably are best to leave the way I'm showing you, but this is important here. This gobbledygook that I've written down is actually quite useful. This setting takes the transmission reference in my caption. In that case, it's basically the event name, and the ISEQ, that's the sequence, so it just advances right below it here from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And media type, that tells it whether it's a video file or a still file. So without trying to get into too much detail, the important part of that is what it's going to do is when I ingest, it's going to set up a folder on my desktop like this. It's going to have my job number. It's going to have the name of the event, coronavirus rest, and the date. And then within that, each disk is going to show up with that same information, and it's going to have the number of the disk. So it's going to be 01, 02, sorry, 01, 02, 03, and it'll say still or video. So it'll keep my video files separate so I can edit them separately. This is a very useful way to manage all of these, and every disk is going to be within this one folder, and the folder has got all the information I need. This works in conjunction with getting an XMP file from my editor. That's what Steve was mentioning. If I get an XMP file, and we'll get to that in a second here too, that will fill out all this information for me. You can decide to do this entirely differently. You can make whatever folder name, you can put the date, you can put the project, primary destination is the desktop. You can do whatever makes you happy here. But this particular combination, when it's combined, especially with an XMP from the editor, does this automatically for me. And it's a very, very a good way to keep things in check here. So when I put a disk in, this is going to pop up.
Hey, Bob, can you
Yep.
talk about just the DATS, the DATS variable? Because like when I do that on ingest, I do what Bob has just outlined, but I add DATS at the front end of that.
Sure.
So that when you're archiving your photos, you're creating you're creating a files naming structure that is sequential. So you can go back and look by date very easily then if you did that, if you create an archive of all your stuff.
Right. So my system right here actually does have the date right here. It does pick it up, but you can pick on a variable here and change it to, I think you were saying, is it DATS right there?
I think it's DATS. That's where it goes, like year, month, day.
Yep. So you could pick this one in here, and we could just double click it. If I were to, if I want this in the beginning, hold on a second, like that, and then I click on DATS, then it's going to put it right in here. So you can make this any way that you want. As I said, my system works real well, but you can make your own. And you can put any of these variables in. Let's look at the metadata IPTC template. This is the stationary pad in Photomechanic 5, and they've changed, they're trying to get rid of IPTC because that's really not being used very much anymore. So now it's the metadata template as opposed to stationary pad. It's the same thing. One note, make sure that use global template is checked. If you use local template, you can end up with 2 different templates, and that can get really confusing and lead to errors. So for most things we do, use global template should be checked, and only if you really know what you're doing and really have a reason should you be messing with local templates right there. I do not believe in renaming my pictures. I want the original file name on them, so I leave this blank. And down here, I almost always leave erase source disk after ingest and unmount source disk after ingest. Why? Because after my ingest, the card will everything on the card will be deleted and the card will be unmounted, and then I can take it and put it right in my camera and go back to work. Now, a lot of people are going to go, oh my God, you can't do that. You have to format every time you put a card in the camera. And yes, that is definitely best practice. But in the real world, I don't really have time to do that. I forget to do it, and then I come back in and I got the old stuff and the new stuff, and it drives me crazy. So I don't do it. And I do the ingest source, erase source. In all my years of using this program and thousands of pictures that I have put through Photomechanic, I've never once had an error by erasing source disks after ingest. Because if there's an ingest error of any kind, this is the last step, the erase, and it won't happen if there's an error. So I use this. I've never had a problem. It works great for me, but other people will tell you, oh my God, don't do that. So user beware, disclaimer, yada, yada, all that stuff. Lastly, and importantly, let's go back here to the metadata IPTC template. This is the boilerplate that you're going to fill out before you even start the event. And this information generally will either come from an XMP that came with your assignment, in which case you would click on load and you would point towards the XMP and you would say open, and that will fill out all of this information. Or if you don't get XMPs, you can manually fill this out. And it's however your paper or your people need it to see, that's what you would fill out. Note,
So, Bob, if I can interject one thing here.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the middle of testing the XMP that Bob's showing right now is the is the format that comes from the Imagine system. And those of you that have filed your images from numerous events to the FTP split know that that goes to Imagine and it also goes to USA Today. We're in the midst of expanding their assignment system that they use, and we're starting to test it at USAT, and then we're going to test with a couple more sites. The idea is that that assignment system is going to be the assignment system the whole network will use. And so everybody will then be able to generate consistent XMPs like this on their assignments. And so it'll save a ton of time for everybody on the back end when we have a standardized caption template.
It is incredibly useful just to be able to hit load and click on a file and say open and have all of this information filled out, because there'll be no typos because your editor never makes a typo. We'll let that go.
Yeah, that's not directed to me. I don't think.
We'll let that go. But this will all be filled out for you. And this is the boilerplate that's going to go on every photo that you ingest. And it is generic. But look at this snapshot again. Remember, we mentioned these snapshots. This is so handy because I can make it USAT and it's just going to put a generic one on. Or let's say I make it Nadal and it's going to, this I've already filled out. Nadal hits to Federer on day one of the 250. All that is filled out. So if I'm shooting Nadal, I just click on Nadal here and my caption's already written for every picture I ingest. Think how much time that just saved me. Wait, you say, what happens if it's Federer? Well, I just click on Federer. Federer hits to Nadal. So those are both filled out before the event starts. And I even get crazy and I'll do something like Federer Jubo. And I have Federer celebrates win over Nadal on day 11, whatever. That's all done. And yes, I'll do both of them. I'll do Nadal Jubo and Federer Jubo. And on a championship match, I'll even do Federer hoist the US Open trophy, and I'll fill that out, and I'll do the same thing for Nadal. So all my captions are pre-written. All I have to do is choose which one it is here. And by the same token, if I have
two questions in the chat, Sandy's asking, so do you prep all of those ahead of time?
Yes, correct. I'll be doing that before the match. I'll be doing it, and on a day, I'll typically do all 3 matches. So I'll do 12, 15 captions, and that takes some time, but I only do it once per match.
And then Scott Yates has a question, says his photo mechanics won't ingest lock files only. What am I doing wrong?
It's only ingesting locked files.
No, it won't ingest locked files only. I mean, isn't the behavior that it ingests the lock files first and then the rest?
Correct. So typically it's going to ingest the locks and then the rest, unless you have incremental ingest on, but that shouldn't have anything to do with the lock files.
Because is there even a way to only ingest locked files?
Not off the top of my head, but I can think about it or check.
Scott gets the award for stumping Bob.
Yeah, you stumped me. Either that or it just doesn't.
Bob.
It's broken.
Bob, just real quick, you want to demonstrate how you literally the process of saving those captions and then also clearing them out when you're done with the event?
Yes. So if you've written a caption, thanks, David. If you've written a caption, all you do is save, and that will pop up right here. You'll enter a name for it, and I'll call it test, for example, and I'll say OK, and that will show up right here, and now I have test right here. Now in PM5, if you want to get rid of any of these things, you need to hit the Option key and then click on test, for example, and that will open the folder where all of these files are, and now you can either delete them or rename them if you so choose. But that's how you deal with that. In PM6, they've added a little menu item here called Manage Snapshots. And if you click on that, it does the exact same thing. So in PM5, it's Option Select. In PM6, just Manage. And it takes you to the folder where these are. And that's true throughout the program. Thanks, David. So let's say you've got your boilerplate all done. I'm going to close the template, and now I'm going to ingest. Everything else I leave, and my pictures are ingesting. Yet again, and done. So now let's look at the browser. I'm going to double-click images into Preview. Preview is a toggle. So if I click once, it goes to browser. If I click again, it goes into the preview mode. So it's a toggle. And I'm just going to use my right arrow key, to flip through pictures here until I see something that's good. It may take a while. And blah, 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 blah. And, oh, gee, there's a picture I like. Okay, so what am I going to do first? I am going to make sure that crop is selected. And I'm going to crop, and let's say I want it to look like this. Now, you can zoom right here. That's the letter Z is a toggle also. And I can use the space bar and I can drag it around until I see it. But to me, much more useful in PM6, let's get out of zoom, is this right here. And this little guy here is going to give me a look at the actual crop. This is not in PM5, it's only in PM6. But it's really, really useful. It's called View Cropped Image, and the letter P is the toggle. So if you hit P, it's on, and P, it's off. Now, one note, when it's on, this is what's called a modal dialog, and you can't do anything else here. So you can't now go into the caption, or you can't send the picture the way it is. It's only used for a quick look to get in and out, because you can't really do anything with this when it's in that preview mode. So use it to let it P to look at it, go, yeah, that crop looks great, and P to come out. And now the next thing I'm going to do is hit the letter I. And that's going to open my IPTC info or metadata info in PM6. And this is where we do our caption. And again, this is going to look a little bit different in mine because I've customized mine. For example, some fields like here is called source normally. I've changed it to USA job number because that's what we use. So it's going to, and this is the kind of customization you can do in that preferences accessibility that I showed you earlier. And I get rid of a lot of fields that we just don't need to see. So I can see everything I need in one screen instead of having to scroll down to get to other fields that I need. So this customization really saves a lot of time. At this point, all this stuff is going to stay where it is. There's nothing else I need to do except fill out the who part, because the where, the what, the when, all that is already in here. And that got done through filling out the stationary pad first. So this is where the code replacement comes in. I can do backslash, the letter O for Oakland, 4, and backslash, and look what happened. Oakland Raiders quarterback Derek Carr. That saved me so much typing. If I wanted to say is looked at by backslash Jets, J for Jets, 58, backslash, boom. Can't spell looked, that doesn't help me. So now all this information got filled in automatically for me using this code replacement. That saves me a shitload worth of time. And yes, I know there are no Jets in US Open, but that's fine. So when my caption is done, I say okay. And now I have 3 choices at this point, depending on how much time I have and all of that. My normal first choice is to FTP the picture. That's how we're going to be sending it. So let's look at that briefly. I hit the letter U for upload. I don't have to find it in the menu. Letter U for upload. And all this is filled out in advance. There's nothing I need to do except potentially to adjust the size of the JPEG file based on your FTP requirements or your storage requirements. But generally speaking, I leave this up about 7 or 8 most of the time, especially if it's cropped. I don't touch anything else, and I hit send. Actually, enter will send. So I'm going to cancel that. Look at this again. I hit the letter U, and then I hit enter, and it's gone. If you look on the lower right, we should see that. It happened too quickly. You couldn't even see it. So that's how fast the FTP goes. Now note, if you hit U for upload, this connections right here, this is where you can tell it where it's got to go. And this will get done in advance. So in this case, I've got it set for Merlin, but I might want to send it to the split or whatever. This is where you need to be putting in the FTP information for your newspaper. But once that's in, I don't touch it for the rest of the day. So all I do again is
and I'll just put a plug in again for we'll share out that info for that FTP split. Anything that you cover locally that has, you know, anything beyond excuse me, regional interest, please share it to the split. That's how we get photos out to Imagine for full network distribution for within our network, and then for syndication. We've been growing that significantly the last year or so, and we really appreciate all of your contributions. So anything that is of at least regional interest, please share there.
If you look at that email and download the preference files I sent you, the information for the FTP split is in there. That is one of those that's in there as the default. So that information with the passwords and everything will already be in that preference file that I sent out.
Hey, Bob, can you show people how to check that your transmits went through and what to do if they don't?
Yep. So typically, if we look back at the browser, you'll see a green square right here. It's hard to show that. There's a green square over this picture. That tells me that picture has been successfully FTP'd and been received okay. If it shows red, there was an error. And also on the left here, let's move this over a little bit. You'll see under tasks, you'll see upload. And if there's an error there, that upload will show red. Now, one of the cool things in PM6, one of the complaints that I made all the time is as you put disks into ingest here, that upload would get pushed down and you wouldn't see it. And if you ended up with an FTP problem, if you lost your line, you wouldn't know that. So I bitched about that for several years. And in PM6, there is now, if you right click on upload, you can say pin at top, or you can set a priority for it, which does the same thing. That keeps upload here at the top. So I always know if that transmission has been successful, whereas the ingest tasks will then get pushed down. If I've ingest and there's no error, I don't need to see that information later. So this is important in keeping this upload at the top and keep an eye on things. Note that this green dot, if you close this browser window and reopen it, that green dot will go away. This upload status doesn't last if you close the window and then reopen it. And there's some really technical reasons for that. We've asked them a million times to try to keep that showing, and it gets very complicated, and they can't do it, basically. So just note that that will go away if you close the window. All right, back to transmitting. FTP was our first choice, but it's not the only choice. We have two more. One of them is, instead of FTP, we can save a picture. That'll be Command S. And you can just set your quality. In this case, I save it to a folder that's called to send. And I'll rename it with the job name and a sequential number. This stuff, again, is all in that PowerPoint that I sent you, so you can look at that. But the object here is that instead of directly sending a picture immediately to FTP, I can just save it to a send folder. And then I can go back and look at them and decide, well, do I want to send all of these or not? And then typically, if I'm doing it that way, I'm going to send those pictures via an FTP program like Transmit rather than Photo Mechanic. And the reason is, if I transmit it from Photo Mechanic, it's going to re-JPEG that picture each time I do that. So I've JPEG'd it once to save it, and then I'm going to JPEG it again when I upload it via FTP. And I don't want to JPEG a picture twice and compress it twice if I don't have to. Now, there are some workarounds to that. If I hit U for upload, right here where it says save as a JPEG, I can uncheck that and have save, say, original photo. So that won't re-JPEG it. The problem with doing it that way is you'll forget and not change it back. And then you'll end up sending pictures that you cropped. They won't get cropped. They'll be sent full frame. So I'm not a big fan of using this original photos thing. I would rather just go take the pictures, save it in a folder, and send it via an FTP program if I want to do it that way.
And Bob, do you want to talk about the saving saving your transmitted photos in a subfolder directory so that you have everything from a from a game and in all your edits in one place?
Correct. Good point. So if you look at this file uploader that we have here for FTP, I have rename set to object and sequence. So what that does is it'll have the object name. Typically for me is the name of the event. So it'd be like Jets Marlins, and then the sequence is just this countable sequence that you can reset right here and make it 001. But I tend to leave these alone and let them count, because the last thing I want to do is have any file names be the same. So I just leave the count alone until it gets to 999. And object sequence, that will name my file. But here, save a copy of transmitted photos in a specified directory, and I have a folder on my desktop called transmits. So when this file is successfully transmitted, then that picture will get copied into this transmit folder. And I'll have a record of exactly what got transmitted, and those are handy to keep. Even if you get rid of your originals somewhere else, you're keeping your transmits handy. So this is the way we do it right here. Lastly, there's one other thing to point out. There is upload via FTP, for example. And let me point out one more thing. FTP is not the only possibility here. There are lots of other uploaders built into Photomechanic. And so if you need to send it to Dropbox or to Amazon or to Flickr or whatever, there are lots of other possibilities here. But 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10, we're using FTP, at least these days. But there are other options here. And the other thing to point out is you can, instead of uploading a picture with FTP or saving a picture, there's also copying a picture, which is Command Y. And that is essentially the same thing as save as, but it's not going to re-JPEG the picture. So if you've already put it into Photoshop and you've already compressed it and it's already been cropped and you don't need to recrop it and recompress it, Command Y or copy is a very good choice. Send it to send, and then from there I'll send it after that. And questions?
Hey, Bob, it's Sean.
Yep.
While we're waiting for questions, I have a minor question, and
Sure.
sorry if you touched on this already. I was prepping for the next call, but sometimes we see characters translate differently when they come over into Presto. So, for example, like we'll see like a quotation mark or an apostrophe translate differently. Are there any known character translation issues that we should be on the lookout for when it comes to the metadata porting over into Presto?
Off the top of my head, the answer is no. I don't think. Andy, have you seen something on our end?
I have seen a few issues. Like if you put like it's either a / or a / in a file name, sometimes that will hang things up.
Yeah, that's a Merlin.
It's usually on FTP programs.
Okay.
And occasionally like tildes and stuff like that will.
But as far as Presto goes, I'm not aware of anything specifically.
Okay, great.
Yeah, hey Sean, it's Dave Baratz. I think it's single quotes or double quotes will sometimes get hung up in Presto and do that sort of question mark thing. So that I think it might be like an apostrophe or a single quote might be one of the big hangups to look out for. But
yeah,
I don't know if there's a
that's-
way around that necessarily.
Yeah, but I think you're right, David, and that refreshed my memory. So that's like, don't ever put quotes in the in what ends up being your file name, because that's where we've run into just like rejected FTP. You know, just images won't flow in.
Great.
Okay, I think we've got about 5 more minutes here, and I just want to do a real quick look-see at Photomechanic Plus here. So I'm closing Photomechanic 6. I'm going to open Photomechanic 6 Plus, and real quickly, it looks the same. There aren't a whole lot of differences here. This right here is your browser, and your favorites. By the way, any of these in the navigator, you can drag up into the favorites, so they're there all the time. That's really handy also. But what I want to show you is the second tab right here. If I click on that, now we're into the catalog portion of Photomechanic 6 Plus, which is a catalog program, otherwise known as a DAM, or a digital asset manager. And it's similar to Merlin, and it is a way to catalog all of your pictures. Now think about this. You have drives all over the place. I've got drives over here, 15, 20 hard drives, maybe CD-ROMs, different drives and different computers that are networked. I can scan all of those drives once, and that will take overnight. That'll take some time. But all of those pictures are now going to be saved in a file. That file, that catalog file, I typically am not keeping on my laptop because it could take about 40 or 50 gigs. So I'm keeping it on a separate small SSD drive. That seems to be the best for me. But that file is going to have everything that you've ever shot that you can, after you've put it in. Let me show you how that works real quick. This is Bob Catalog, which is now active. And in the search bar, I'm going to use double quotes. And double quotes means everything. If I now hit that, I have every picture that I've scanned in. And at the moment, if you look down here at the lower left, it is 120,000 pictures. It's everything, and it's searchable. If I click here on Browse, I can search on any of the IPTC stuff, byline, date, keywords. On any EXIF, I can search anything shot with a 600mm lens. I can search by photographer name, by capture time. I can search by anything. For example, in capture time here, if I click on that sucker, come on, I can click, let's say from 2010, I can dial it into January 3rd. It tells me January 3rd, I shot 66 pictures on January 3rd of 2010, and they pop right up. It is incredibly useful. Now you'll notice that these pictures, for example, this circle here doesn't have, it's not filled in, it's not green. That tells me this picture is located on a drive that is not now connected to this computer. It's somewhere else. Well, where is it? If I select it and I look down on the lower left, it tells me it's on my 4 terabyte storage 2 drive, which is sitting on the shelf somewhere. If I want it, I'll just connect that drive up and get the full res picture. But this picture is a preview. It's lower res than the original, but it's darn good. And quite frankly, if you needed it quickly, you could copy and send it, you know, it could run online if you needed to. But if you right click, you see you don't have the option to edit this picture because it's a preview that doesn't exist online right now. Other pictures that are online have the green dot and you can fully edit them. So again, this is a quick way to take all of your pictures and find anything you want in no time. If I clear this and go back to search, this has been my last thing, Sean, and I'll search on Brady. Boom, everything I've shot on anybody named Brady is instantly searchable and findable. So this is still in beta. It's coming soon. They're still working on it. I'm told that it'd probably be something on the order of $30, $40 increase to Photomechanic 6. So if you have Photomechanic 6, another $30 or $40. And again, don't quote me on that because they haven't really decided. But it's not going to be $1,000 or something. It's going to be a reasonable upgrade fee, and a really, really big help to a photographer in finding all his stuff. That's all I got.
And Bob, does that work with video files? And like, because I know like it's basically creating, you know, like basically a thumbnail, like, you know, a 2,000 pixel thumbnail. So like, and does it do it with video files? And those are those lower res that you could take with you and just have it with you?
It's a good question. I'm not sure of that because generally when I've searched, I've eliminated searching the video files because I thought it would clog me down while I was testing. So I'm not sure of the answer to that. My guess is that you might just see a thumbnail, but you can't preview it. I'm sure you can't preview it if it's not connected. But you might just have a preview image and at least tell you where to look for it. So that'll help.
Great stuff, Bob. Awesome.
Yeah.
Anybody's eyes spinning in the back of their head so far?
No, it's good.
Bob, you're the best.
That's all I got.
Thanks, Bob. This
Fucking
this is
joy.
definitely the best immediately reviewed tutorial I've ever been a part of.
And hit me up with questions if you want. If you want, you know, more detail on any of that stuff, just, you know, fire it up, and I'll be glad to drill even deeper.
Awesome. I will circulate the recording of this as well, so keep an eye out for that. The files you mentioned at the top, they're downloadable in the chat as well as through email. And I hope you guys are all ready to join up on the other meeting for a look at Premiere Rush. Thanks for your time, Bob, and thanks for everybody's questions. We'll see you in a few.
Thanks all.